Hello, welcome to the Echoes Across the Valley. If you are new here, please subscribe and turn on the notification so you don't miss our next video. Early trade contacts in Africa. Since time immemorial, Africa has never been an isolated continent. Long before the coming of colonialism, trade routes stretched across deserts, coastlines, and forests, linking African societies to the wider world. These early contacts were not merely exchanges of goods, they were exchanges of culture, technologies, and ideas that shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. From the camel caravans of the Sahara to the dhow ships of the Indian Ocean, this is the story of the early trade contacts in Africa. The early trade contacts in Africa refers to the initial systems of exchange and interaction between African communities themselves and between Africa and other parts of the world before colonialism. These trade route networks are developed long before modern industries and were based on the exchange of goods such as gold, ivory, salt, iron, hides, cola nuts, and even slaves. They were called early because they marked the foundation of Africa's economic and cultural links with both its own regions and with outside civilizations like Arabia, India, China, and later Europe. Essentially, these trade contacts were majorly four, that is to say, the trans-Saharan trade in the north, the East African long-distance trade, the transatlantic trade in the west, and the Indian Ocean trade in East Africa. Let's begin with the East African long-distance trade. Also known as pre-colonial trade, the long-distance trade was a kind of trade that took place between the East African coastal people and the interior tribes and societies of East Africa. The long-distance trade is believed to have boomed between 1000 to 1500 AD, long before the coming of Europeans. It was called long-distance trade because it involved the moving of long distances by traders from the coast to the interior of East Africa and vice versa. Traders often moved in caravans of about 500 to 1000 people, with porters often carrying goods like ivory, animal skins, iron tools, and gold, marching across savannas up to the coast. When they reached the coast, they exchanged these items for goods like guns, cloth, mirrors, and spices from the Arab traders. The major interior tribes that participated in long-distance trade included Buganda, Bunyoro, Karagwe, and the Nyamwezi. The medium of exchange in this trade was basically barter trade, that is to say, goods for goods and services for services. The mode of transport was head portage, involving the carrying of goods on heads by porters and slaves. The mode of communication was mostly sign language. However, with time, Swahili language developed and became the trade language. The long-distance trade would eventually come to an end after the coming of the Europeans, who introduced new systems of transport such as roads, railways, and ports that disrupted traditional caravan routes. Number 2, the Indian Ocean trade. The Indian Ocean trade was a trade carried out between the coastal people of East Africa and the Arab traders across the Indian Ocean. The Arabs were drawn to the East African coast by the seasonal monsoon winds on their dhows. The Indian Ocean trade is believed to have taken place between 1000 to 1500 AD. The Swahili city-states of Kira, Mombasa, and Zanzibar flourished as the major market centers where Africans, Arabs, Persians, and Indians mingled. Gold from Zimbabwe, ivory from the interior, and slaves from the hinterland were exchanged for the fine textiles, beads, guns, mirrors, and spices from Arabia. The Indian Ocean trade gave birth to the unique Swahili culture, blending African traditions with Islamic and Asian influences, leaving behind enduring legacies in language, architecture, and religion. The mode of communication in this trade was Swahili language. The medium of exchange at first were cowrie shells, but later minted coins were introduced by the Arabs. The mode of transport at first was heady pottage, but later donkeys were introduced and became dominant. The Portuguese conquest of East Africa between 1498 to 1510 would eventually bring the Indian Ocean trade to an end, as the Portuguese invaders disrupted the trade systems and replaced them with modern ones. Number 3. The Trans-Saharan trade. The Trans-Saharan trade took place between the Arab North Africa and the people of West Sudan, or the societies located south of the Sahara Desert across the vast desert of the Sahara. The Trans-Saharan trade was so ancient that it is believed to have begun as early as the 3rd century. Across the vast Sahara Desert, trade routes connected West Africa and the Mediterranean world. The camel, also known as the sheep of the desert, made this possible, carrying salt, books, and manufactured goods southwards. While gold, cola nuts, and enslaved people traveled northwards. Great empires such as Ghana, Mali, and Songhai rose and prospered because of this trade. Cities like Timbuktu became intellectual hubs where scholars studied mathematics, astronomy, and theology alongside bustling markets. The Trans-Saharan trade was more than economics. It was a bridge linking sub-Saharan Africa with the Islamic world, stimulating both wealth and culture flowing. Number 4. The Transatlantic trade. By the 15th century, another trade system emerged, the transatlantic trade. While the older networks Unlike the older networks, this trade was marked by tragedy. Many ships carried guns, textiles, and manufactured goods to the African coast, exchanged them for enslaved men and women, and transported them across the Atlantic Ocean in what became known as the Middle Passage. Millions of Africans were sold into slavery in the Americas, where their labor fueled the plantations of sugar, cotton, and tobacco. In return, raw materials from the Americas flowed back to Europe. While the trade enriched European powers, it devastated African societies, depopulating regions, fueling wars, and destroying local economies for centuries. In conclusion, these early trade systems, from the East African long-distance and Indian Ocean trade networks, the transatlantic slave trade, all the way to the trans-Saharan trade, shaped Africa's place in global history, bringing wealth and knowledge while perpetuating suffering and exploitation on the other hand. To understand Africa's past, we must remember that its history was never isolated. It has always been connected to the world through the ebb and flow of trade. And with that, this is Teacher Selum Kumamzafal for the Echoes Across the Valley. Let's keep the African dream alive. And with that, this is teacher Serunkuma Muzaffar for the Echoes Across the Valley. Let's keep the African dream alive.